This podcast is a collaboration between Costard and Touchstone Productions and the Dads from the Crypt podcast. For those listening to the podcast, this is the scene in The Shining where Shelley Duvall's character realizes that Jack's character hasn't been writing a novel, he's been going insane. And then he appears behind her.
How do you like it?
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the How Not to Make a Movie podcast. I'm Alan Katz.
And I'm his partner, Gil Adler.
Today we're talking to a friend of yours. You've known Kevin for a little bit, yeah, Gil?
Just a little bit. I met him through John Harrison, our mutual friend, and is a writer, director, is a wonderful guy.
And a guest from a few episodes back.
Yeah, and he was telling me about a publisher who's also rather a prolific writer. And I thought, gee, I don't really know anyone like that. And I think it'd be interesting to hear from his perspective, not only about writing, but also about producing and publishing, which he does.
Publishing, yeah.
And helping young people do that as well.
Yeah, Kevin Anderson has published over 140 books, over 50 of which have been on U.S. and international bestseller lists. And he has this is staggering, he has more than 23 million books in print worldwide. He's written, he's written for the Star Trek books, he's written X-File books. All the new Dune books he has co-authored with Brian Herbert, the Frank Herbert's son. An amazingly prolific man. I think he gets up in the morning and the first thing he does is write, and write is the last thing he does at night.
You're going to hear more about how he does that and what the process is for him. And hopefully it might help some of you young filmmakers and young writers out there.
Yeah. So here's Kevin.
The more good writers out there, the better, as far as I'm concerned.
You're here.
I like to watch good TV shows. I like to watch good movies. I like to read good books. And tearing down somebody because they're successful is not conducive to my mission statement.
Your mission statement covers, well, you've published over 140 books, over 50 of which have been on U.S. and international bestseller lists. And you've got more than 23 million books in print worldwide.
That's a few. I like to write.
Wow. I mean, Kevin, wow.
Sadly,
what's the matter with you, Kevin? I thought you were prolific. What's the matter with you?
Yeah. Well, I just kind of did the math myself, and I realized that next month is my 35th year since my first book was published. And so, I mean, now I'm much older and slowed way down. I'm only doing like 3 or 4 books a year, but there were some times when I was just a Tasmanian devil and I did like 12 books in a year.
We're going to talk about that, because really what I'd like to talk about a whole lot is process, the writing process. You have broken it down to somewhere between an art and a science. To be able to be that prolific is not an easy thing to do. You really have to be able to. It's more than just discipline. But like I said, we'll get to how you got there.
All right, we'll dangle the carrot and let people stay on.
What part of the country are you from? Michigan, right? Wisconsin.
No, Colorado. We're Colorado.
Colorado.
I'm
okay, all right.
Out my window is Pikes Peak right there, and there's some thunder clouds coming in. So I'm glad I'm not hiking this afternoon, and that's what I would love to be doing if I was a writer like in the movies, and all I did was sit around and go, "Gee, I'm waiting for the muse to strike me with a metaphor." Then I might go out walking, but I've got.
Is this the part of the world where you're from, though?
I've been here 25 years now.
Okay, but
so it's where I'm from, I guess.
Before that,
Before that, I was born in a small town in Wisconsin, so I kind of my childhood was depicted in the movie A Christmas Story. That was me. That everything about that was my childhood.
Huh.
And after I graduated from college, I was the nerdy kid. I read comic books. I wanted to talk to people about Lord of the Rings, and I was living in this little farming town.
Where
And
did
so
you go?
I went to college. I went to University of Wisconsin-Madison, which is sort of like an island of Berkeley in the middle of cows and cornfields.
Yeah.
But when I've graduated, I got a job out in the San Francisco Bay Area as a tech writer. And I moved out to California, and it was like Dorothy opening up the black and white door, and there's Technicolor Oz on the other side of it.
Yeah.
And it was just suddenly I was surrounded by all kinds of people who read books and could talk about interesting things, and it was just great.
What year did you come to the Sunshine State?
83, I think, something like that. I mean, I got so I'm in Wisconsin, and I graduated in January. I took so many classes that I graduated a semester early. So I'm graduating in the middle of the winter.
You
And
are
Wisconsin-
prolific in various ways.
Yes, well, and Wisconsin had like this horrible cold snap. It got to like 50 below zero, and I worked as a waiter and a bartender to put myself through college, and I'm driving home at like 2 a.m, and it's 50 below zero outside, and I'm on this lonely country road, and my car died because cars don't function at 50 below zero, and I'm sitting out there going, "Oh crap, I'm going to die out here because where?" And this little old lady drove by and stopped and gave me a ride. She said, "You look so cold there." But during that time, I said, if I ever get out of this, I'm only applying to jobs where it's warm. And as soon as I finished that, I sent out resumes to California and Arizona and New Mexico and Texas and Bay Areas where I ended up. And I lived there for about 15 years. Before I bought my dream house out in Colorado. My wife and I had been married, and my writing career took off so much, and so did hers, that we realized we wanted to be full-time writers. And you aren't a full-time writer living in the Bay Area. It costs too much. So we moved out to Colorado with the mountains and the forests and camping. And my wife has relatives here, and the land prices back then were a lot cheaper, and so we built our place, and we've been here for 25 years.
I'd like to go back a step. You said you went out to California for the weather, but you were in Northern California.
Yeah, compare that to Wisconsin.
Yes, but still, what is it? Was it Twain that said that the coldest winter he ever spent was a summer in San Francisco?
Yeah, well, I was in the East Bay, so it was pretty hot.
It was better there. A couple degrees warmer. Yes, okay. So, but hey, it's still it's California, and
Right.
Everything's better in California.
Well, I mean, being in Wisconsin, I mean, there were some state parks and stuff like that, but it was a Norman Rockwell painting. Well, Norman Rockwell and Norman Bates, that was kind of the two things together. But it really wasn't something that inspired my imagination, and there wasn't a whole lot of places to go. And I moved out to California, and living in the East Bay, I could drive within 2 hours, I could go into downtown San Francisco. I could go to the Redwood Forest. I could go to the Pacific Ocean and the beach. I could go to the Sierra Nevadas. I could go to Yellowstone. I mean Yosemite, sorry. And in a few more hours, I could drive down through the Central Valley and get to Death Valley in the desert. So it was just like,
yeah.
I was in an alien planet, and I loved it. And
It's
and
a
that's
fantastic piece of real estate. There's nothing else quite like California.
Yeah. Now I just wish all those people would get out of there, and then it would be a nicer.
Yeah, we wish that too.
Nothing personal, but anyway. But I love Colorado too, and I really enjoy being here. And that's kind of, I get inspired by. I do all my writing when I'm out hiking. I have a digital recorder. I have my notes. I go out and I just walk and I tell my story. And I've been doing this for decades now, so that when I'm out walking, what I'm dictating is pretty much the finished stuff on the page. I cleaned it up and polished it and stuff, but it's if you listen to my tapes, it's like, well, listen to me, it's not a tape, it's a digital audio. But if you listen to my audio files, it's like listening to an audiobook. I visual, instead of typing the words, I visualize the sentences in my head, and
Oh, sure. Yeah. It's writing is such a particular thing. The way that you get the words from your head onto whatever that, whether it's a page or whether it's a recording medium of some kind. Yeah, I don't like writing. I don't like texting people on a phone because I don't like the medium.
Oh, I always dictate. I always just hit the little microphone button and dictate it. And
Yeah,
it's amusing to see what the speech to text turns into. But I mean, one of the things that I really like to hammer in, because I have unwanted arguments with people who argue with me about whether dictating is real writing and whatever. The real writing is here.
Yes.
Everything else is just capturing the words that I'm making up, whether I'm writing it longhand, whether I'm dictating it, whether I'm typing it. It's the words that I think up that is the story. And it doesn't matter
really how we're getting it to the reader. It's simply, yeah, the delivery system. That's
well, and my real problem is when I'm in the zone and I'm in the middle of my story, I'm rattling as fast as I can. I can't type that. I mean, I'm a fast typist, but I can't type that fast,
Right.
and I can't handwrite that fast. The only way that I can capture
true.
my sentences as fast as I think them is by dictating.
Yeah.
And everybody, you both know people who speak before they think about what they're speaking. So I'm like writing that way, but I wish sometimes people would actually give a moment's thought before it comes out their mouth. But
Indeed. Well,
that's a different thing.
You're absolutely right. When you're in the zone where you need to be, really, the words are flowing out of your head. If you're writing if you're writing what the characters say, you're probably not getting the characters right. The characters need to speak for themselves. And when you're really there, it flows from them, and you're merely the typist on their behalf.
Well, and one of the other things is, like, my dialogue, I can speak it the way people speak. And I've had my audiobook narrators say that my books are some of the easiest ones to narrate because I don't accidentally type 7 words that start with the letter W in a row, because that's would never be the way I'd speak it.
Right.
And when you're typing it, you don't necessarily hear that. But I like to also, I mean, you might see this during the interview. I've got a cat sitting there and they'll come and want attention. And I've had like 6 deliveries at the front door today with whatever packages are coming and the phone's ringing. If I'm off on a trail, I get all of the sensory input, the trees and the mountains and the wind, and I can smell the heat on the rocks, and I can, see the squirrel running around, but it's not distracting stuff. This is it's input. It's not. I mean, I can't tell you how much I hate it when I'm right in the middle of this big battle scene and the phone rings and it's somebody I have to talk to for half an hour. Well, that's just derailed me right off a cliff, and then I have to get back to it. So
indeed. When did this process start? Speaking your the words as opposed to typing the words. How long have you been doing that as opposed to just typing them?
No, I mean, first I should give a quick little plug, because everybody asked me about this so much. I finally wrote it into a little book called On Being a Dictator, and you can just find that on Amazon or whatever. It's $5, but I mean, again, I get asked this so much. I finally wrote down everything that everybody asked me and I put it all in there. But there have been studies that show very clearly that your creativity is enhanced if you're moving, if you're doing something, rather than just sitting there like a zombie and staring at the screen. And so I would often get to a position where I'm stuck on a book. Like I don't really understand the character, or I don't know how to fix this plot tangle or whatever. And so I would just go out for a walk. I'd go out for a walk and just kind of let things mull over in my head and run it around. And then I'd go, oh, well, that's like pieces would fall into place. It's just like having a lubrication to your imagination.
I love the shower. For me,
Well,
standing with warm water coming down, man, the thoughts would just flow through my head.
that's an exactly a similar situation. And I'd be a mile away from home, and I'd get all these brilliant ideas, and I'd run back home and try to write them all down. Well, I'd lose them all before they get home. And so I started carrying a little notepad with me, but that doesn't to be writing while you're walking, and that didn't work. So I started taking a little, at the time it was a micro cassette recorder, so little tiny tapes.
Sure.
And I just take it out, and oh, here's an idea, or even just like a character name, because I write weird fantasy novels and stuff. And so I would just go for a walk, and I'd be going, oh, how about this? And how about that? And I'd start mapping things out. And I got to the point where I would go, oh, well, and chapter 1, this happens, and chapter 2, this happens. And I start like laying it out. And it got to the point where I was doing things so detailed, it was basically a first draft. And then I realized, oh, well, why don't I just write this way? And because at the time I was living in California, so there was the Redwoods to go to, and there was Yosemite to go to, and many more obscure places to go. And I found that I really liked it. And the problem was, though, that I'd spend an hour writing a chapter, then I'd come home and spend another hour typing it, or 2 hours really, because it's usually 2 to 1. But that was an hour that I could have been writing another chapter. And so then I went, there are humans who actually type for a living. So I found the place where I worked, there were people who were like transcriptionists and stuff. And so I hired somebody to just transcribe my tapes. And now I've got I burned out so many typists. I think I've ruined so many hands because I write so fast.
Well, yeah.
And now I've got like a full-on typing service, and we just, I get as many, as soon as I get it done, I send it off to them, and I don't waste time transcribing. Now,
I would imagine the other component that allows you to do this, you've got to be a real hardcore structuralist. You've got to really, in terms of, I know I say that because I'm especially if you want to write outside the box, you got to know how to do the box really, really well.
Right.
It's structure. If you allow it to do its work, it will tell you what all the scenes need to be, and then all you have to do is write the scenes. You don't have to.
I'm a full bore outliner. If I have the book I just finished, the one I'm editing right now, was 43 chapters, turned out to be 75,000 words, which is your average length of a book, like a 350-page book probably. And I outline it. I like chapter 1, this happens, chapter 2, this happens. And I spend a lot of time doing that. And I really work on it. And look, if you're making up a story, there's the creative part in putting that story together, and then there's more the mechanical part of putting the words down and editing the punctuation and spelling and everything. Well, that creative part can happen while you're typing those words in the first place, or it can happen ahead of time. And I spend the comparison I use is, if you are hiring somebody to build a football stadium, would you want that person to draw a blueprint first, or you want them to just start digging holes and putting up walls and hope they all fit together? Indeed. That means he's going to have to knock down a bunch of walls and put up other walls and put a roof on and all this stuff. Well, why not spend some time ahead of time drawing your blueprint, planning where you're going, so that you put the walls and the pilings and the foundation in the right place? To me, writing a 600-page Dune book that I do with Brian Herbert, well, that's like building a stadium. It's not like pitching a tent. It's a big, complicated thing. So you don't just go, well, I'm going to go and write whatever I want and hope it all fits together. And my co-author will write whatever he wants, and let's hope it all fits together in the end.
There's no way to do it.
He and I are both full on. We will brainstorm for days getting all the details right, and we'll outline, and we'll rearrange the outline, and we'll get it all done, so that we spend, the old adage for carpenters, measure twice and cut once. Well, don't just start cutting boards before you measure them. I want to know what I'm building. And Brian is like that too. And we really plot everything together. We've got another Dune book. I think it's our 21st
Wow.
Dune book coming out this October, right before Dune Part 2, the movie, comes out.
What a prolific universe.
Well, Frank Herbert left 15,000 years of history there and hundreds of characters. So there's plenty of room to be exploring things. But
it's a marvelous universe. It really is. It's unlike, well, it's the best-selling series of books.
Well, the Dune itself, I believe, is the best-selling science fiction book of all time.
Yeah.
I mean, as far as I know, it's not like I can look it up somewhere, but we've done our research and that's what we think. But it's effectively the Lord of the Rings for science fiction. It's like the seminal volume of science fiction. And I fell in love with it when I was a kid, and I am just very honored to be working with Frank's son, using a whole bunch of his notes and everything. Frank passed away in 1985, I think. So Brian and I have been working together since 1996-ish.
You never got to meet Frank Herbert.
No, in fact, that's kind of one of my sad stories, that Frank was a huge inspiration to me, that I read not just the Dune books, but every one of his books. And he wrote 25, something like that, other science fiction books. I read all of them, and they inspired me, and that's what I wanted to be for science fiction. And I sold my very first novel in 1987-ish or some. I forget. Don't ask me numbers. I'm too old to remember all these things. Anyway, so
I hear you.
So I was writing my first novel, and I really wanted to get Frank Herbert's address so I could send him a signed copy when it was published. And I sold the book to Signet Books, and it was going to be published, and I was able to join the Science Fiction Writers of America, which is sort of like the WGA for science fiction. Well, way smaller than the WGA for science fiction, and I got Frank Herbert's home address.
I would use the word exclusive.
Yes, exclusive. But Frank passed away before my book was published, so I was not able to send it to him, and I never did get to meet him in person. But his son is one of my very best friends, and we've spent innumerable hours just pouring through all of his notes and his draft chapters and everything.
You have had the chance to extend his universe into to really to stomp around and to explore, to take it places, gosh, that perhaps he hadn't even had a chance to imagine. Wow.
It's a fanboy's dream come true. And I am an old professional fanboy. That's all. When I grew up as a little kid in small town Wisconsin, I was reading Edgar Rice Burroughs and Andre Norton and Doctor Strange comics and everything I could get my hands on. And nobody around me read science fiction. I mean, nobody did. And I felt like the odd duck, of course, but that's what I wanted to be. I would run home from school, high school, every afternoon. School got out at like 3:15, and if I ran home, I could get there by 3:30 when the Star Trek reruns were on every afternoon. And I had all those memorized, and I was writing my own stuff. I was writing stories from the time I was like 8 years old, and just kept at it, and that's all I ever wanted to be. And now I've got quite a few things published, but I still love doing it. I can't imagine doing anything else. I mean, the stories are it's kind of like muscle memory, or like an athlete that's in tip-top shape, that you always just, the stories come. I just keep telling the stories. And
you have a quote. Let me get this right. I am serving the purpose for which I was designed. Therefore, I am satisfied with my existence.
I said that. Okay.
You said that. That's something you actually wrote. That you seem to be living that very thing.
Well, and I if my career crashed and burned and I had to go and get a job as a banker or an insurance salesman, I would be just miserable. I have that
Indeed.
this is what I want to do. And it's now to get to some of the focus of your whole podcast too, but my everything about being a writer is capricious and volatile, and you never know what you're going to get next year. And I could have a great year and then I could have a terrible year.
Oh,
And,
gosh,
and
yes.
well, and the thing that has changed like 10 or 15 years ago, well, here's a good story. Like in the mid 90s, I had one year where I had 7 New York Times bestsellers in one year. I had so many I mean, it was like putting up my hands because they kept throwing book contracts at me. And I loved doing it, and I had it made, and I was never like I didn't have to worry about anything else. I was just going to keep writing, and that was great. And what I never ever imagined was that the publishing world would get turned upside down on its head. That there used to be like 13, 14 major publishers I could sell something to. Now there are 5. And they buy much less. And Borders bookstore closed. That was half the bookstores in the country. They went away. And there used to be, if you guys remember, when there used to be, when you would walk into a store, every single movie that came out, major movie that came out, somebody wrote the paperback book of that movie.
Right.
Alan Dean Foster's Close Encounters of the Third Kind, there must have been 10 million copies of that out there. Every bookstore had a rack with the Batman movie or everything. And that was a good gig. I did, I don't know, 7, 8, 10 of those where they would send me the movie script and I would turn it into a book that people could read. I would try to connect some of the dumb dots that the movie didn't figure out.
Yeah.
Put it into a book. And I wrote 54 Star Wars projects for Lucasfilm.
Wow.
And
just out of curiosity, okay, what did a conversion from a movie screenplay into a novelization, what did that pay back in
I get maybe $10,000 for it, sometimes $15,000 for it. That's great. Now it takes me a month to do. And I could do a few of those, and I would write Star Wars books while I wrote my own books. And so that was like a job that I loved writing Star Wars books. I went up to Lucas Ranch over and over again. I met with George Lucas, and then I met with Chris Carter from the X-Files, and then, I mean, this was great, but all of that collapsed, that they just stopped doing it. They didn't, profit-wise, they didn't make very much because the studios took such a big licensing fee on it, and paperback books never had much of a profit margin. And when Borders books went out of business and grocery stores realized that they could make more money selling flour and sugar than they could selling paperback books, that the book sections went away. And I mean, there's a million different reasons for it, but that steady work just kind of disappeared. And because it used to be 13 major publishers, and now it's down to 5, and it was almost down to 4 last year, but a court blocked the sale of Simon & Schuster to Penguin Random House because that was going to be a monopoly. You could shop your thing around. I could write a book and send it around, and I'd have 12 publishers bidding over it. Well, now there's 5, and most of them won't bid against each other. So you're kind of, if they don't want it, then nothing. So I didn't change, the publishing world changed. But then I did change, because all of that doom and gloom I'm saying, there were just as many doors that opened up, because that's when Amazon introduced Kindle. That's when people started being able to publish their own ebooks. You didn't have to go to HarperCollins to get your book published. You could do it yourself.
Exactly.
And
so
a lot of people who didn't know what they were doing did it themselves. But I've been doing this for 10 years. I teach a graduate program in publishing to teach people how to do it right. I've got a whole publishing house. I'm running Kickstarters now, which are paying me way more than the publishers ever paid for a book.
Yeah. So you've got a Kickstarter. You did a Kickstarter for your last your detective who is a zombie.
Dan Shamble, zombie PI. So that's a series that I wrote.
Yeah.
I just love it. It's like the Naked Gun meets the Addams Family. It is just, it's stupid and it's fast paced and it's hilarious. And I have a ball writing those books.
It certainly seems that way.
And we sold it to a regular major publisher that published the first 4 books, but then they kind of lost interest and they didn't want to do anymore. Well, I wanted to do more. And I like self-published a couple collections, and I mean they do fine, but a small indie published book doesn't sell like a Bantam book does. And I was kind of like, gee, do people really want me to keep writing the Dan Chamble books? And it was like a 4-year gap from the last one. And finally, a friend of mine said, you should try a Kickstarter because you know the fans are out there and let's see. And so I wanted to repackage all the covers. I had all the rights back, so I was republishing them all on my own publishing company. And I ran a Kickstarter for, hey guys, you want a new Dan Chamble zombie PI novel? And it just flooded in. We had 640 backers. It paid me like 3 times what the other publisher ever paid.
So you had your advance, and the audience, so you went directly to your audience.
Well, and see, that's one of the big golden things right now is
Yeah.
you cut out about 17 middlemen. It's
Yeah,
like
lots of people
I
in
write
suits.
the book and it
Yeah.
goes to the reader. There aren't all kinds of sales reps and bookstore reps and distributors and printers and warehouses and everything. It's I, Kevin, write the book and it gets published and sent to the backer who bought it. And it's great. But again, I know what I'm doing. I've been doing this for a dozen years. I know how to design a book. I know how to design a cover. I know how to publish a book. I know how to get it printed. I know how to do all that stuff. And that's not a comparison I use is that you can walk into a Home Depot and they'll tell you, sure, you can remodel your own bathroom all by yourself. Yeah, most people.
In theory.
So, you might have the tools, you might have the equipment, but it might not work. So anyway, the Kickstarter gave me a whole different way of doing things. I think what I'm spouting about is that instead of having one, back in the 90s, there used to be sort of like one big freeway career path that if you wrote a book, you sold it to publishers and they paid you in advance and they sold the books. And I was a New York Times bestseller, so I sold another book and another one. But now it's like you got all these different side roads all over the place. And I'm still publishing. The Dune book that comes out in October is from Tor Books. They've been our loyal publisher for dozens of years, and they push the Dune books out. And I certainly have a couple of other books from, if you remember Weird Tales magazine, I've got a book that Weird Tales has a book line now, and I'll be writing that one. But I also have the option to do it myself. I can run a Kickstarter, and I did a few years ago. I've had over 150 short stories published too, and I did a 4-volume collection of my collected short stories. There is no publisher in the world, no major publisher would want to do a 4-volume Kevin Anderson short story collection, but I wanted to do that, so I did it myself on my press, and they're fancy and handsome, and I like showing them off. And the cool thing is now all my short stories are organized in these books. So when I get frequent requests from like wannabe producers or somebody who's interested in an episode of a TV show or something, hey Kevin, do you have any serial killer stories? I go, here's a whole volume, look at those. And so that helps too.
To live in a DIY world is refreshing, and I find it rather compelling. I mean, Gil and I are approaching, we're about to take a show out into the world. We're not going to do it the way we used to 1,000 years ago. We're taking it to the audience first and seeing if our audience, hey, if our audience wants us to do it, we'll walk into buyers with our audience already in hand.
Well, and I'm successful at it, so I'm not complaining about anything, but I really did kind of like the good old days where all I did was write a book and send it somewhere, and then I wrote another book. I mean, you're a one-man band now. You got to do all the tasks yourself, all the marketing, the production. And I happen to be married to a very, very good editor. So I don't have to hire an editor. I just have to cook her dinner. And
This
that
works out.
that
Okay.
works out just fine. And I've got a really good crew of cover designers. They're in Ukraine, so I send them the ideas,
Yeah,
and they
I
send
saw
me these
that.
covers back, and it's gorgeous. And every once in a while I get we're going to need 3 extra days to get this cover done because Kyiv just got bombed and all of our power's out and we're in the bomb shelters. So I go, yes, you may have the extra couple days if you need that. And
You are good.
yes, well,
Kevin, do you see this going over into film and television? I mean, the process that you're experiencing, that you sort of discovered with books and publishing of books, do you see that as a next step, would be a means towards motion pictures and television doing that?
you mean you don't need $300 million to make a movie? I thought you had to have that much money to make a movie. And well, see, there's an interim step that is happening right now, in that there are a lot of people that are doing their own indie comics and graphic novels.
Yes.
So like when I write a book, it's just me putting words down, and then it's easy to format,
Yeah.
words on a page and put it into a nice book layout and then get that printed. If I'm
Mhm.
writing comics, which I do, but for regular comic publishers, I'm writing the scripts, but you need to have somebody else to do the artwork and the coloring and the lettering, and then color printing requires, so that's a whole step up. But there are now people who are doing that. They're doing a
Mhm.
great job of it, and some of them are using Kickstarter, some of them are just funding it themselves. I'm pretty darn sure there are also indie filmmakers that are doing the same thing. And one of the examples that I like to show off, and I'm saying this just last night with my wife, we watched, I'd seen it before, but we watched Avatar: The Way of Water. And it's an astonishing movie. I mean, in fact, I think I appreciate it more the second time because I was looking at everything in these scenes is in a three-dimensional space because they're all in water,
Mhm.
where people don't normally think that. It's that you're walking on a plane, you're on the ground, and you're doing things. But the Abbott, it was so beautiful and so lavish and so lusciously done. And it took him what, 11, 12 years, and I don't even have any idea what the budget was in that movie.
Right.
But some of my favorite science fiction ever is the old black and white Outer Limits TV show.
Mhm.
And those were extraordinarily well written. And what people might remember are the dumb looking rubber monsters. But those stories didn't depend on the special effects, they were engaging stories.
Indeed.
And you could tell a great story without needing an Avengers Endgame kind of budget. You don't need to have a Marvel movie where there's 7,000 things going on in the background when you're having two people drinking coffee in a diner. That if you're a good writer and a good filmmaker, you can make something that you can do with a lower budget. And I happen to be the person that I would prefer a really good story than a bunch of really good special effects.
A long time ago, I did some work in LA and in New York in film schools. And it was really interesting because the film schools in Los Angeles, they were all about special effects, and they were all about the digital, and they were all about how either economically or not so economically they could accomplish those things. Whereas when I went back east, and Frank Danielle was running with Milos Forman, Columbia University Film School, or even down at NYU, they were all about the written word. They were all about the story and the character and the emotionality of character, and what's that interaction like. And I really found it interesting to see the difference between the East Coast and the West Coast, how they were basically, training young people to be in the film business or television business. I think that's graduated now. It's got a little bit more sophisticated. I still think too much emphasis is on the special effects, and not enough is on the written word, and not enough is on the emotion relationship of those characters. But I think it's getting closer.
Well, and the East Coast are probably more thinking of like a a play mindset where you're on a stage and it has to be focused on what they're doing. And my wife and I, just a few weeks ago, we watched Quantumania, the Ant-Man Quantumania movie, just a couple of weeks ago. It was a fun movie. We enjoyed it. But when we started it, when they got into this quantum world, I said, just start looking at what's happening in the background. And if you watch, you've got the characters doing something, but there's like 30 things happening in the background. And I just sort of wanted to go, make it stop. I want to see this story. It was pretty stuff. It was beautiful special effects, but I don't really need to have. I remember watching in the theater the second Transformers movie where there's like 100 big robots bashing 1,000 buildings and it's all happening at once. And I'm a big special effects, big movie in the theater guy, but I was like putting my hands over my eyes going, make it stop, make it stop. And yeah, I don't think we need to have something in our face and in all directions all the time. I want just a little focus on the story sometimes. And
human beings, it's really what good stories are about, human beings and how we interact with each other. That's it.
Well,
Kevin,
but I mean, our life right now is sensory overload. I mean, I can't get gas without the gas pump having a TV screen giving me an advertisement right above the thing that's telling me I can get 5 Monster Energy drinks for $10, and then there's something else. I sound like a crotchety old fart, but really that's why I go hiking in the forest.
It's an overload. It's an overload of the wrong information. Hey, we could be inundated with other information that is less. It's always trying to sell us stuff.
I wonder if some of that has to do with the effects of video games, because I've noticed over the last, say, 30 years in terms of films that I enjoyed 30 years ago, and I go back and look at them, even I have a bit of a problem with them because I feel like they're too slow in some places. And they're just, gee, did I really like that 30 years ago? And I look at it now and I go, why do I feel that way? What? And I just think that younger people don't have the patience. They're not willing to invest what we used to invest in a film, whether it was the first hour or the first half hour or whatever, because the gratification today is so immediate with these video games, and it gets faster and faster and faster. And I'm just wondering if that has an effect on how people movies today.
Well, I mean, all of us, we are in a situation where what's coming at us is a fire hose instead of a trickle. And that's how we're trained now, that if something doesn't happen in the first 5 minutes of a movie, you're going to change the channel because this is boring, nothing's happening. And I remembered when I tried to introduce my kid when he was young to like the old classic Star Trek episodes. And I loved the arena episode where Kirk fights the big reptilian Gorn guy, and he has to use the resources to build a little cannon. And I thought, you got to watch this one. This is really good. And we sat down and watched it. And to today's audience, and actually this was more than a decade ago, it is boring. It takes about half an hour in the show before you even see the lizard guy.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody would ever do that today. And as a writer, as a creator right now, we have to recognize that. That means that we're on you got to have something. You don't have the leisure of like Tolkien, where I'm going to write the Silmarillion before I start something. And that's, nobody has that patience anymore. And I mean, for good or ill, I mean, that is what it is.
We must take
some... I wish it was the old days, but
I think, as filmmakers, we have to take some responsibility for that, because, and hey, we work for a guy who probably is partially responsible for that, Joel Silver, because it was cut it faster, come into the scene as late as you possibly can and get out as early as you possibly can.
Was Silver the one that would just like page through the script and say there's too much text here, so it's going to be too slow of a movie? I've heard something like that.
Probably.
You got to put like something happening, and that's actually, I mean, that's good for pacing. That, remember, in Charles Dickens' day, people would sit down with David Copperfield, and they had all day long to just sit there and read without the phone ringing, without anything. You had hours to read. And now
Yeah.
you've got it on your phone screen while you're on the bus until the next bus stop.
Yeah.
So that's why James Patterson is such a huge hit, because he was one of the first guys to have like these 3-page chapters, and you could get a little nugget of it and you could read and get your story, and it was in much smaller pieces. And again, I'm not whining. I wish it was back in the old days. That is the way it is.
Yeah.
And we have to write to a sensibility that the audience is not going to give us 50 pages before something happens.
If I think back to Jeff Goldblum's character in The Big Chill, who describes his success as a writer as happening because he's able to write everything he needs to, everything he has to say within the time it takes the average person to take a crap.
Yeah, I mean, those are parameters we work with.
Yeah. So if you can't do it within that,
Another benchmark.
you have written quite a few for franchises like Star Wars and X-Files. To assume the voice of a franchise, which, as you step into the world, it already exists. It has flavors, it has dimensions and dynamics. How hard is it to assume the mantle of a franchise and write in its voice?
Well, I've only taken on stuff that I'm already a fan of. So I was already watching the X-Files. I already loved Star Wars. I already loved Dune. I mean, all this stuff. And like, one of you guys lives in like Portland or Seattle, right?
I live in Vancouver.
Vancouver, okay. So I've been to Vancouver. If I were going to write a story set in Vancouver, I would do everything I could to understand what Vancouver is like, what the nightlife is like, what the cafes are like, what the weather is like, what the streets look like, what the what's around, what kind of the vibe of the people are. And I could write a story set in Vancouver. It's exactly the same to write a story set in the X-Files universe or in the Star Wars universe, except for Star Wars, I had the movies to watch. And when I was working on it, there were only the 3 movies.
Be that as it may, but in essence, anyone could do this, but very few people really and truly can, because you have to know which details are the important ones that really signify the franchise, and which are just what's the cake, what's the icing.
And you don't dare get anything wrong, because the fans, they live this is what they want.
Sci-fi especially. Hey, I spent 2 seasons doing The Outer Limits, man. Sci-fi fans are nuts. If you get the science fiction wrong, they'll come at you.
Not nuts in a good way, but yeah.
Well, yes, the best way possible.
But think about, in a different sense, think about this is Nikola Tesla, by the way. It's his turn to get attention.
Indeed.
Think about James
Cameron
writing Shogun. Like, he had to get everything, all those details about ancient Japan. And Shogun is effectively a science fiction alien first contact story. Mm-hmm. It's a human being, or the white character, thrown into an alien culture. And he learns about it, and he has to get all the details right. Now, it takes a lot of research. And in Star Wars, it involved me just like watching those movies over and over and over and over again, and reading some of the other novels that have been published, and there were game handbooks, and getting everything right. And I was fortunate in that I was one of the first people writing in the Star Wars universe. So if somebody asked me today, there were like 350 books to read to catch up on, and I don't think my brain could handle getting all that stuff. But
that's quite an amazing statistic all by itself, that there were that many books in that universe.
Well, for the X-Files, that is in our modern world, with or without monsters. And I researched the FBI, and it turned out that there are a lot of FBI agents who were X-Files fans, and I made some phone calls, and they gave me tour in the San Francisco offices and in the Washington, D.C. offices. And I got some real backstage stuff, and I got a bunch of the details that I could use in writing my stories. And the funny thing is that once I started really doing research into what the FBI does and what they investigate, I'm realizing that, hey, half of the TV episodes are wrong anyway. I mean, there are very specific types of crimes that the FBI investigates, and half of the X-Files episodes don't fall into that thing. So,
But aside from that,
you still do your best. And the thing is, you have to really love the show so that you can deliver what the fans want. I mean, if I say I didn't like Star Trek and I wrote a Star Trek book, they would smell that a mile away. They would just go, this guy doesn't respect it, this guy doesn't understand it. And I bring my fan creds to it when I'm doing that.
I think that's quite right. There needs to be fan cred to begin with. Otherwise, otherwise it's just a job. You're passing on something that you love to a new audience, in essence.
When I had my full-time job as a tech writer, I was writing respirator safety manuals and chemical protective clothing books. And yeah, that's not that fun. But writing Star Wars or X-Files, Batman, Superman. I wrote the novelization for League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, and I worked in Titan AE, and I worked in Supernova. Was not a great movie, and there are movies and Sky Captain in the World of Tomorrow that you live in that universe and you do a great job, you hope.
You teach.
Yes. In fact, this afternoon I was working on my syllabus for the summer thing. I teach. I run a graduate program in publishing for Western Colorado University, and I'm about to start my 5th cohort, so 5 years now, and I'm teaching. Most of them are writers about how to be small publishers, to publish their own books and distribute them and get reviews and advertise them, and understanding type design and fonts. And
so you're not teaching them how to write, but you are teaching them how to be writers.
Right. I mean, that's the second half. I mean, and I'm in my college, we've also got a genre fiction MFA program and nature writing, all kinds of other things. But, if their college program teaches them how to write their great science fiction book and then turns them loose without any clue what to do with it afterward, well, then you've only made it to the top of the mountain. You got to make it back down too. And publishing and getting your work out there is something that's kind of vital. And I teach that. I enjoy it. I've also run for 14 years now this big thing called Superstars Writing Seminars, where it's sort of a very intensive, very supportive 4-day workshop on the business of writing. Because when we started it 14 years ago, there were lots of writing workshops on how to do characters and how to describe scenes and how to write poetry about cats, but there wasn't anything that told you how to read a contract and how to understand copyright and how to market your work and we thought, well, that's kind of a big missing piece. So we started it, and it's
the business of the writing business. It's otherwise you might as well just be a fan.
Well, I mean, there are so many writers that they could have written the most brilliant book ever, but if nobody reads it, then it's that tree falling in the forest and nobody hears it.
Indeed.
So,
that is the challenge, is to get onto the mountain and then stay on the mountain.
So, that's teaching that. And Superstars has been it's one of the things on my tombstone. He created Superstars. I mean, that's one of the great things. And then my grad students, they're my Jedi. I mean, I get a new group of Padawans every year, and we turn them into Jedi or Sith Lords by the time they're done with it. And I really enjoy that. And of course, because I write books, I don't count as a writer in the Writers Guild of America. So I can't join the WGA, so I can't get their health insurance. So I had to pay out of pocket. But now that I work for the university, I can actually get health insurance, which is the the bane of many freelance writers, because if you pay out of pocket for your health insurance, it is outrageously expensive.
Yeah. So if someone were to hire you to write a couple of scripts, you get into the Writers Guild.
Well, not right now with the strike going on.
Oh no, of course not right now. But the strike
Well, I mean
lasts
that
forever.
is one of the I had a whole bunch of irons in the fire that were just ready to take off when the strike hit. So and I fully support the strike. There's a lot of stuff that they're doing that's very important work.
It is madness considering how much you've written and what you've written, that you haven't written a gazillion scripts as well. I mean, you could.
Well, I've written
your
a
approach
gazillion.
to what you do would work quite well doing what we do.
Well, it's kind of an insular business, the film business, with the script writers.
Only until and then people, and suddenly
right.
you're on
the I'll get there eventually. After I publish another 175 books, maybe I'll get there. But
you're overqualified for the gig, man.
Yeah, well, I'll try. I mean, I've worked on the 2 Dune movies as a consultant, and I'm a co-producer on the TV show and things. So I'm working in the business. I just haven't written a script that they made into an episode or a film, but eventually we'll get it. But if not,
this has to get fixed. I'm sorry, but this has to get fixed. I have one last question, and then we will let you get back to your incredibly busy writing day. Can you teach people how to write?
You can teach people that have the potential how to meet their potential. And I've had people who come that like, Kevin, I really want to be a writer, but I don't have any ideas. And I'm like, well, it's like saying I want to be a pro football player, but I don't know how to throw a football. I mean, why do you want to be a writer if you don't have any ideas? You can teach people how to become a better writer if they're already working on things. You can teach people techniques on how to improve their productivity or how to improve their scene descriptions, and I give workshops on like plot structures and things, because I'm like if you go into a doctor's office and he says, and here's your MRI, and you don't know what to look at that, but the doctor knows how to see all those things. Well, I've spent my career doing x-rays on plots, and so I can see and I know exactly this. So I'm a terrible person to watch a movie with, because I'm always going, oh, this is going to happen, oh, he's dead, oh, because there are tropes. Don't ever be the cop partner of a likable cop, because you're going to die by the end of that movie. And don't ever say the words only 3 days till retirement and things like that. But
I have to ask you one last question before Alan lied when he said that was the last question. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you. We have a mutual friend, John Harrison, and John has just recently come out with a book that I believe you published.
Yes.
Yeah, and I just want to give a plug to our audience about that book, because I read it and I thought it was fantastic, and we both agree that.
What's it called?
It's called Passing Through Veils. Yeah. And my publishing house is Wordfire Press, like words on fire, Wordfire Press. And if you go to wordfirepress.com, just look up John Harrison, you'll see the book there, and you can order it, or it's on Amazon and everything else. But so John worked on the Children of Dune miniseries and the Dune miniseries, and so that's how I got to know him, and we just stayed friends ever since. And he had written 1 or 2 other books before, and I read some of his other books, but he was interested in getting this one published with a big publisher, and he sent it to me, and I said, well, there's your first mistake. But anyway, he sent me the book, and I read it, and it's a very creepy, very lyrical, beautifully written. It's a creepy, quiet ghost story. It's not a Saw movie, and it's not a Friday the 13th movie. It's a psychological, creepy, and it's a slow build. It goes against everything we were just talking about explosions in the first 5 minutes. But it's a very great ghost story, and I was glad to work with John, and we're glad to get it out. And I designed the cover. I laid out the interior. I kind of did, because I have people to do this stuff, but because it was John and it was his book, I thought I want to DIY. I wanted to do this myself and get his book out there. And the cover is really creepy, sort of like a spectral face pushing through a fabric. And I designed the interior. I think it's a beautiful book.
Yeah, it is. And it's a great read. Anybody wants a really good read. And it's like, it's sort of like we were talking about. Yes, you're right. Things have to be faster. But then you look at a movie like A Quiet Place, which takes forever to get going, but it's very creepy and it holds your attention because of that creepiness. I think John's book is similar to that. It really sucks you in at the very beginning and you're wondering, where is this going to go? Where are they headed? And it just takes its time and pulls you in.
Well, and one last comment, as we keep saying the one last thing, but one thing that we didn't really mention is that we are now breaking our audience into a lot of sub-audiences that can get their own specific thing. We used to be pretty much a monoculture. There were 3 TV stations on, everybody watched the same shows, and there were bestsellers, and everybody read the same books. But now, in part, thanks to Amazon, because you can put in keywords and you can find steampunk, vampire, detective, erotica novels. And there's a whole library up, but I'm sure there's a whole fan base for that. And
but we're not broadcasting, we're podcasting.
Yeah. Well, and you can find the audience that likes quiet, chilling ghost stories. It doesn't have to compete against Stephen King or whatever else is out there. It can just be, put the right keywords in there and you can find the audience that likes that kind of book. And I've written some steampunk things. In fact, today, as we record this, is the 1-year anniversary of the release of my last novel with Neil Peart, the drummer from Rush, who passed away a few years ago. And it's a steampunk fantasy adventure that's got a whole bunch of Rush lyrics all the way through this stuff. And I adore that book, and it's found its audience. It's called Clockwork Destiny. That's got all kinds of things in it. And it's just, we find our audience, and it's the same, like Amazon has helped me find exactly the kind of music I like to listen to. I don't have to listen to top 40 music. I can find the Northern European goth chick metal music that I like to listen to. And that's a good thing.
Yeah, true enough.
Indeed. Kevin, I thank you so much for spending some time with us and talking about the craft.
Well, I enjoy doing it. I enjoy teaching. I mean, that's how I'm so prolific. I like what I'm doing. So
clearly it wouldn't work the other way.
So as we were saying before, I did write a book called On Being a Dictator. If you want to learn about the dictating stuff, my website is wordfire.com. You can go there and there's my book list and everything.
And
my publishing
what
house is Woodfire
a
Press.
book list.
Oh, it's about 2 years out of date. I just can't keep. They come out faster than I can even put it on the list. So, no worries. I get it there.
Well, thank you again.
Thanks for chatting with you guys.
Thank you. Keep it up, my friend, and we'll have to do this again sometime.
And thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We'll see you all next time. The How Not to Make a Movie podcast is executive produced by me, Alan Katz, by Gil Adler, and by Jason